Hi everyone, this is Chris and this is the Botch Pit. So, I'm not gonna lie to you, this is completely and fully off the cuff. There's no scripting, no transcript, nothing here. I just felt like it would be a good time to I keep mentioning that I want to get started on Mage the Awakening 2nd Edition and stuff I'm working on for that, and I most certainly will. The Chronicles of Darkness campaign is definitely taking a break after the events of last session, which was just a nightmare with the characters we had. Things went really wrong, and some of the players, primarily Nick, got damaged in the process. So, with those characters, we're giving them a break. And we're starting, for the first time, not a zoo game, but this time a full Mage the Awakening campaign setting, however you wish to phrase it, Chronicle. But I keep getting pulled away from my studying up on Mage and really getting into it, which is funny because Mage is definitively my favorite game, typically with now Geist being the second. But there's something kind of magical about Vampire the Masquerade. It's where I got started. It's really where I came from as far as mature role playing. A little bit of background. I've been role playing since I was 9. And I got started with the West End Games Star Wars game. And at some other point, I'll really go in depth as to my experience. And from there, I went to... I played even the Men in Black RPG, the old Marvel RPG by TSR, which you literally needed a graph to play. And from there, I went to AD&D 2nd Edition with THACO, which, take it or leave it, definitely teaches you how to understand systems better. And I started role-playing online on AOL, and I fell into this thing called Raiden, which was thousands of people played in all these different forums and guilds and this whole thing. And I kind of got drafted into a war. And it turns out that they followed a bastardized version of Vampire the Masquerade. They'd have the powers they would use, but they had a very different rule system to use. Nothing that, no storytelling or D10 system, just a bastardized version of it. And I kept, I'd use stuff, but I didn't understand where it was from. And I kept using online resources, BJ Zanzibar's Potpourri of Darkness or whatever that was. Man, that's a throwback. But I really had no idea what was going on, and my character kept saying he was a Lasombra Sabbat. And to this day, the Lasombra is my favorite clan, without a doubt in my mind. And I'm partially biased because of this, and partially because they're just, really cool. But it was a bastardized version. I kept being told that I was a terrible Sabbat, and I kept saying I wasn't, and I didn't know what a Sabbat was. And I wanted to get a leg up on the rules, so I went, Borders was the bookstore still back then. I went and tracked down a copy of the actual Vampire the Masquerade revised edition at that point. I was 14 or 15. And from there on, first I looked up on the powers that I planned on using in the game, and then I started looking through the rules system, and then I started looking at the meta plot, the idea, the clans, the Camarilla, the Sabbat, the Independents. And from there, it was just, I was hooked. And even though I continued playing in that Raiden campaign and stuff like that, on America Online, they also had actual White Wolf rooms, which really is what got me started on that whole zoo campaign settings mindset, because it was anything goes in most of the rooms. If there was just a one-type creature situation, they were usually in private rooms. So I fell in, and Vampire is what got me going. I fell in love with the art, just the goth punk aesthetic, from all the other tabletop role-playing games, they were all so, science fiction, fantasy, and even when, my favorite AD&D 2nd Edition stuff was actually Ravenloft, so I guess the writing was on the wall where I was going to go to as far as, horror or high fantasy or anything like that. So I fell in with Vampire, and I fell in with the White Wolf rooms, and it was just from there, I was just immediately in love. Now, of course, from there, the problem with that is, again, please remember, I was a teenager. It was that inner rebellious streak. Everybody plays Vampire, so it has to be the worst of the White Wolf games. That kind of teenager, hipster mentality. So I decided I wanted to be better than that. And for the record, it wasn't better. It was just I wanted to do something different because I felt like everybody else, because there's tons of Vampire players. And there's tons of werewolf players, and I was not a fan of Werewolf the Apocalypse back then. But from there, I found, I tried getting into Wraith. And back then I couldn't do it because I didn't see the point of playing a game where you already quote-unquote lost. I didn't understand that back then. Now I look back on Wraith and I'm like, that's got a great premise to it, which is why I love Geist. I played for a Hunter's Hunted character, so I could still play in Vampire, but not play a vampire. I got the Kindred of the East stuff, so I could play a Shi, Shih, the demon hunters, the Kindred of the East hunters, or whatever you wish to call them. Long story short, I ended up falling in with Mage. And ironically, the total polar opposite of that, for the most part, would be Hunter the Reckoning. I say the opposite because Mage is a very intellectual, philosophical, idea-stimulating kind of game, where Hunter the Reckoning is pretty much like regular people that just suddenly got the power to kick the shit out of fallen angels. Like, that's what it was. And that's not a bad thing. It was okay. I'm glad I got both ends of the spectrum on there. But no matter what game I fell into, I would still find myself occasionally perusing those older vampire source books, the Guide to the Sabbat, my revised edition, all of that. All of it. So, I feel, I fell into Chronicles of Darkness. I felt like the World of Darkness did indeed need that reboot. Vampire the Requiem at the time, mind you, it was first edition really at that point, didn't do anything for me. It kind of didn't. It was very much... It was less 30 Days of Night and more Anne Rice. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. Interview with the Vampire is fantastic. But even now, I know people are going to hate me for it, but I still typically prefer Queen of the Damned because I feel like it's got that... I don't know, that savagery. I've got problems seeing Antonio Banderas being savage. I've got problems seeing Tom Cruise being savage. Brad Pitt. They did great romantic vampires. But... it's just really not what I wanted out of it. And for the people that like that, more power to you. I respect it. It's part of the reason why I always say that I'm crazy glad that White Wolf licensed the Chronicles games over to Onyx Path and didn't just go, okay, cool, cancel this so we can focus on our White Wolf proper, if you will. So Vampire didn't do anything for me back then. I couldn't get into Requiem. Ironically, I like Werewolf the Forsaken. I've yet to play one, but the premise is stellar. Really cool ideas. And of course, I fell into Mage and, all those other Chronicles of Darkness games. And when I stopped tabletopping for years, had my daughters, my son, got married, the career that I was in at the time, no time for tabletopping. When I got back into tabletopping in January, even then, the first book I looked at again and reordered because mine had gone missing because it's a long story, I still went and bought Vampire the Requiem. Just because my collection felt empty without a core vampire book. Even if I wasn't going to use them. It's just a matter of that safety blanket of knowing those blood-sucking corpses that rouse when the sun goes down are still out there. It makes me feel better knowing that that vampires out there in some incarnation. So you can understand that when I heard White Wolf had been rebranded, if you will, and they were making, I heard about Vampire 20, and I was like, hey, that's cool. It's more of a collection of all the stuff that had happened in Vampire with some slight modification to the revised rules, and that's cool. That's really cool, especially when you see all the stuff that's in that book. It's insane. But it's one of those things where I'm like, I've got my revised. Like, at the time, I was just kind of like, I really don't, that's cool. I'm glad it's there. Personally, I don't need to have it because I have most of the books that have those extra things in it. Now, just to have my collection, I will be picking it up again at some point. But I had to focus on the books that I'm using. But with the announcement of Vampire 5th edition, back in the day, I was all about the Sabbat. I was all about it. But I guess I was already kind of opening my mind a little bit because of Kindred the Embraced. Yeah, I know that's a really weird thing to say that helped me really understand even playing my Sabbat, but Kindred the Embraced was my definitive guide to playing a non-rampaging vampire. Like, that's the politics I want. I don't want them to be total Twilight Sparkles like I consider Vampire the Requiem at the time, but I also don't want them to be mindless psychopaths, like the Strain, the Strigoi, or, again, 30 Days of Night's a good reference. I don't want them mindless. I don't want them sappy. I want that fine line. I want that Kiefer Sutherland can sit there eating Chinese food and then the next minute be picking people up off a boardwalk. Like, I want that. And Gothic punk is where it's at, not romance, for me. So with Vampire 5th Edition, at first I was a little put off over the fact that the Sabbat have gone AWOL. They've gone on a great hunt. They dipped out for a little bit. Some of the clans have changed sides. All the elders have been called away. They've been beckoned elsewhere. There's just so many differences. I mean, Theo Bell's off killing key characters. Like, it's really cool. So, I apologize once more. But once I was as I was really deep into the Meiji Awakening 2nd Edition, my book, and I'm usually not one for PDFs. I like the physical books. And it's not a hipster thing. It's just easier for me to read for some reason. I can sit down with a tactile page turner easier than I can sliding on a screen. But even then, even when I'm reading through my favorite game, which would be Mage the Awakening 2nd Edition, for my preferred setting, which would be Chronicles of Darkness at the time, the second the PDF was up for Vampire 5th Edition, I immediately ran to my computer and downloaded it and bought it. And on top of that, I still bought the book. It's pre-ordered. So I paid for that PDF, in theory, twice, because you get a free copy of the PDF with the book. But I had to have it then and there. It was necessary. And I had to order it through a local game shop because you spend extra $35 on shipping, and you got to support your local guys. That if you really want to help White Wolf and you really want to help Onyx Path, you want to help, the industry, you got to get that. You got to get that shit back in stores if you can. You've got to let them know that people want it. You've got to run games in their locations. Fucking bring them pizza. It doesn't matter. Like, bring in some pizza, bring in your dice, make a Facebook event, and invite some people. Because as soon as I started talking about this stuff, as soon as the Botch Pit went up, I started receiving requests. People who I don't know are talking to me about this stuff. And it's not a matter of arrogance. It's a matter of, it's just awesome to have people have been interested in this the whole time, but nobody was talking about it. And that's why, if you ask me, aside from the obvious financial factors, it's part of the reason that White Wolf proper died the first time before it got bought out and then got bought out again in that whole sordid tale. You got to support your local guys. And despite the fact that you may be sitting there reading through your favorite book of your favorite line, you got to support what got you involved in the first place. And you got to bow down and respect what really got the whole ball rolling. And no matter what you think about it, no matter how you feel about it, no matter your opinions on it, Vampire the Masquerade has been and is one of the most definitive tabletop role-playing game experiences that has ever been out there. It changed the gaming culture. It transitioned role-playing from being this thing that, not single-handedly, but it between that and Shadowrun and a couple other things, really changed the fact that you're not just, it's not all Lord of the Rings style high fantasy or just superheroes. Sometimes you want to be the bad guy or the anti-hero. You want to be the one slinking through the night that everybody else is afraid of. Or maybe you're the one that can enact social change in these ancient Methuselah's ways. But regardless, when the king shows back up, whether or not you respect the kingdom, you give respect. And to me, that is why I now and forever, no matter the edition, like they've changed a lot, and I'll cover that later, I am very glad that Vampire has come home. Thank you for listening to my rant. Stay spooky. This is Chris. I'll catch you later.